Welcome to the Scale Up Valley podcast, where we bring the best of the best to help you scale your business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is Rob Bier, the author of the book Smooth Scaling and the managing partner at Trellis. Rob has recently published his book, is an expert in scaling up, so we share here a passion for helping companies to scale. This show is all about scaling up. So what a better guest to come here to inspire us and share some of the lessons learned with his book and with his career. So Rob, tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your track records, and a little bit more also about the book.
Thank you. And first, Mike, thank you for having me. Fun to get to know you and talk about shared interests. So I've done a lot of things. I'm not a young man. I've been an engineer, a strategy consultant. I built one of the first venture capital firms focusing on digital businesses in Europe. So through that experience, invested in 27 companies, saw a lot of what not to do, frankly, maybe more than what to do. And then I built a business of my own in the Netherlands. Back then, we didn't call it fintech. We just called it a consumer finance business. Today, we'd call it fintech, which I sold to Citigroup. And that's more or less the time that I trained as a coach and started to advise other founders rather than be a founder. So that's my background in brief. I've been doing the work I do now for the past 14 years, mostly in Asia, but with some clients in Europe and North America. And I guess the essential thing to say up front is that scaling can mean different things to different people. And it's become kind of the cool new word for growing. We used to say, hey, I want to grow my business. Now that sounds a bit basic. So we say, oh, I want to scale my business. But oftentimes people mean the same thing. They mean grow the top line. And of course, to grow the top line, you have to grow headcount. And that's really what they mean. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I mean something different. I call that growth. For me, scaling is a little bit different. And the actual definition of scaling is that you enlarge something while preserving its essential properties. So like thinking about a photograph where you make it bigger, but without losing the quality and the resolution. And my experience is that many startups have great organizations when they're 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, full of vibrancy, everybody in there together, lots of great relationships and collaboration and constructive conflict. And we go out for beers and sort out our issues. And then one day you wake up and you have 250 people and the organization is not nearly as effective as it was. It has problems and silos and bureaucracy and bottlenecks and fights and tensions and all the stuff that companies have. Right. And so I would argue that's not scaling because we did not preserve those essential qualities of the early organization as we grew. Yes, we grew, but something deteriorated. And so that's been my main focus, is to try to understand what is that thing that's deteriorating? How does it happen? Why and when does it happen? How do we prevent it from happening so that your organization, when you're 250 or 1,000 people, is better than when you were 25 or 50, not worse. Right.
That's really a great point. So typically when we are getting to the next stage, we start facing the famous growth plateaus. And sometimes we need to give a step back to give two forward, right? So the line of growth and of scaling up and differentiating the two concepts is not linear, right? So, and it's also sometimes not exponential. So it's much more kind of going down and up, down and up, down and up, and always getting up higher and higher, right? So how do you see it in that kind of situations? Because there is always a breaking point from, let's say, to be more specific for the audience, to go from 3 to 10 or 1 to 5, 5 to 10 million US dollars in revenue, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 100. there is always special plateaus in all those stages of growth, right?
So I think in headcount terms, because if you're lucky enough to invent the next Google, you might have $100 million and 5 people. So good for you, like WhatsApp did, right? And then you don't need any help
Great.
at all from me or you or anyone else.
Which
so I think more
25, 75, 150, 250. Yeah, what we were talking about before. Okay.
Yeah. And so I would say there probably are some inflection points, but before I get to those inflection points, let me give you maybe more a generalized model.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the what I call a day zero organization, just think about it as like the archetypal 8 people sitting around a coffee table, like vibing on the product, right? And you look at the quality of the interactions between those people, then you get all that good stuff that we saw. Collaboration and fighting over what the product should look like, but in a nice way, and sharing about personal experience and building trust and all of those good things. But the essential word is interactions, right? We have very rich, deep interactions across all the points within those 8 people. And the mathematical problem, because I do think it is partly exponential, is that as you grow your headcount linearly, the number of nodes on the network of possible interconnects in your organization grows exponentially. And so it is actually an exponential problem. And because it takes time and relationship building and all of those things in order to learn to work well with other people, that exponential growth makes it very, very difficult. And that is why so often the frictions that people experience and which I write about, I won't say creep up on you, they take you by surprise because everything was fine and everything was okay and everything was not too bad. And then one day, the exponential growth and complexity of your organization means, oh my God, nothing is working anymore. So that's the first point, is there is an exponential quality. The second thing is I talk about complexity bombs. And those are like upticks in complexity that are even steeper than the exponential growth. And they're essentially the old matrix organization. So if you go from 1 location to 4 locations, or even 2, especially if that's a different time zone, different culture, a different language. When you go from 1 product to 2 products, and you now have the real makings of a matrix organization. So your product and engineering team need to support 2 different products, not just one. So now there's tension around. And so each of those additions, a new department, a new product, a new country or region or office, is like an explosion in complexity. And now the people in distribution in Thailand really don't know anything about the people in production in Finland, and that's where problems ensue. So I think in general, one has to have a model, and the model is worry because it's exponential, it's coming faster than you think, and especially worry every time you add one of those potential complexity. There's one other thing I would say, because you asked about inflection points. And I do think there is generally an inflection point, even if you don't have the complexity bombs, around 150 people. This number is made famous by a professor named Robin Dunbar, who noticed that many groups, from tribes to how many people show up at a wedding to all these different things, or how many people get invited to a wedding, tends to be around 150. And further research led him to conclude that 150 is more or less the maximum number of relationships that we can maintain at a time and have any currency and meaning to us. And so I do think that often, even if you're in one office, somewhere around 100 to 200 people, there's a real weakening of the social and cultural fabric, which we took for granted, right? Which we just thought, oh, well, of course, it's always going to be like that. We're all in this business together. We're all part of the same startup. Like, it's cool. We're in it. We've got a name for ourselves. We're Googlers or whatever it is, right? And then one day it's like, who the heck is that guy? I never saw him before, right? And so I do think there is an inflection point around that.
It makes a lot of sense. And that's when all those pains of cross-functional alignments, prioritization, right? And that's why methodologies that help us to prioritize, to align, like OKRs, a meeting cadence, the communication rhythms, becomes so important. And again, it's bringing, also the culture needs to change a bit, needs to evolve. Well, not change, evolve, right? To have a bit more of discipline, accountability, and alignment. And typically, those early adopters, those rebels, don't enjoy too much discipline and accountability. They prefer to innovate. They prefer to say, "Oh, today I will talk to a customer," or "Today I will think about a new product. Today I will launch this new feature." And now everything needs to go from, talking to marketing to prepare the launch, talking to sales to educate them to promote that benefit, talking to product to make sure that things are ready to be launched, talking to engineering to see if there is any bugs. They're talking to finance to understand if the unit economics makes sense, talk to people to see if we have all the elements in place. So it becomes
all of which slows you down, and suddenly nothing is working. Right? Yeah. And I'm going around consulting with all these people. I may not be very skillful at it because that wasn't what I was hired for or what I joined for. Absolutely right. You put your finger on it. So I would say two things or three things, because you raised a number of points. If you think about that old phrase, VUCA, right? It turns out that startups are very good at some of those things. They're very good at volatility and uncertainty and ambiguity, right? Things go up and down a lot. It's uncertain who's going to buy our product. That they're very good at. But the thing that they're often remarkably bad at is complexity. And what you just described is the embodiment of that organizational complexity. I can't launch the product until I check with compliance and engineering and testing and this and sales and marketing and align all that. That is the embodiment of complexity. And strangely enough, large corporates are very good at that, right? The people with the discipline and the communication protocols and knowing exactly who to CC and all of that stuff. So enterprise is much better at dealing with complexity than the startup world. And complexity comes earlier than we would expect because of this exponential growth. The second thing you said, you mentioned kind of personalities, and that can have a component. I think skills is the bigger issue. And so indeed, managers who were very good at getting shit done when they had a team of 4 rebels coding or growth hacking or whatever they were doing, and are now leading a team of 30, and their job is fundamentally different, but no one has really thought about that. So that is a whole conversation we can delve into, which I would just call the departmental head versus C-suite problem. Like when we were 5 guys doing growth hacking, and I was the departmental head, I was great. And I was very much a player coach. I was still doing a lot of individual contributor work. And when I'm running a department of 40 marketers with different sub-functions, it's a true C-suite job. The definition is very different and the skills are very different. So there's a whole set of issues around that. And we can delve into that. And then there's one other thing you mentioned, which is systems. So OKRs and budgets and project trackers and all the good stuff. And there's a funny thing about systems, which I've been struck by, I guess, in my work. For sure, we can't get too far without some kind of decent systems. But there are a lot of companies with decent systems that have a lot of organizational problems. Mm-hmm. And the question is why? Like OKRs is by now a well understood and mature, let's say, systems approach or technology, and you can Google how to implement it effectively and all that stuff.
In theory, in practice.
Right. And by the way, exactly. And the question is why. And by the way, agile is a theory of how to deal with complexity, which very few companies, at least in my part of the world, have mastered. And the reason is very simple, that all of these things are essentially only as good as the dialogue, as the conversations that they spark or that inform them. Think about a budget. I mean, you can have a terrible budgeting process with a chaotic CFO, or you can have a very elegant budgeting process with a experienced CFO. But that has nothing to do with the quality of the budget itself. That's just the process. The budget itself is good or bad based on the 100 conversations and negotiations and discussions that populate the budget. And it's the same with OKRs. You can have good OKR system, but really the OKRs themselves and how people interact with them is only to do with the conversations that I have with you as my boss or the other guy up there or the CEO. And if you have good systems and bad dialogue, you get a bad result.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I say is dialogue beats systems every time. Another way of thinking about it is that systems are dumb, not dumb stupid, but dumb passive. They just, they tell us whether sales is on track, but they don't fix the sales problem, right? Your Salesforce system doesn't tell you how to fix the sales problem. It just says, oh, you have a gap in Mexico. Dialogue is what enables you to understand why do we have a gap relative to budget? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to implement new pricing or new marketing in order to fix our sales process? So all of these systems are necessary, but definitely not sufficient. Now, what's interesting is if you turn the problem on its head and you say, okay, imagine a company of, 150 people with great dialogue, really good communication skills, good relationships, good listening, good, rich interactions, but no systems. What would happen? Well, the answer is they would invent the systems they need very quickly. Right?
Yeah.
They'd say, I love working with you, but we can't track our sales, so go build a sales tracker, right?
Exactly. And we'll figure it out very quickly.
We'll figure it out. And so I would argue again that thought experiment demonstrates how good dialogue trumps good systems.
And this could almost go to, I'm sure, one of our favorite topics, but I would like to cover first the three stages of a CEO scaling a company. But we could almost jump from here to high-performing teams. And the audience at this stage knows that I have a huge passion for it because I really believe, as you said, it's if we have really the culture, that amazing team together that is able to be aligned on the vision for the long term, mid-term, and short term, then the execution machine becomes a consequence because all of them are angry, passionate about the vision. They want to make it happen, and every single obstacle or struggle that comes in their way, they will face with enthusiasm through their ups and downs, and they will stay united. If there is not that culture, that amazing team, every single problem that comes their way, it will be a nightmare. They will get in conflict. They will stop talking to each other. Things will go down. And we know the virtuous cycle and the vicious cycle that we see with dysfunctional teams and high-performing teams. And of course, there is no perfect teams, neither completely awful teams, but there is a midterm, and we can always improve. But before, let's give a step back and come back to 99% of our guests are CEOs scaling up their companies. And so this is really, really relevant to the audience. So what are the three stages, according to your research and to your experience, Rob, of that a CEO faces through scaling a company?
Thank you. I like to talk in pretty blunt language, so apologies for those.
Please, we love it in that. We love it here.
Yeah. So, when you're a small company, the mantra of almost every entrepreneur and the top team is, we just got to get shit done, right? And if you're 3 people or 5 people or 10 people, really early stage, of course, the CEO's job also is to get shit done, right? He writes the deck, he calls the customer, he calls the investor, he pitches the investor, he hires the next 3 people, he looks at the code, he may write the code, he may test the product, right? So in the early days, honestly, the CEO is just getting shit done. That is phase one, and that's entirely appropriate. That's exactly what they should be doing. At some point, often around 30, 40 people, what you get is a point where you have a head of sales, a head of marketing, a head of engineering, a head of product. They may not be super senior, but they're, competent, good enough for now. So you now have kind of clear functional expertise running those teams. And that is a very important inflection point, often one where you see productivity really jump, because now people are not double hatting and triple hatting. They're doing the thing they are meant to be doing, which means that you can hold them accountable as CEO, which you couldn't when they were doing 5 different things, really.
Right.
So at that point, the CEO's job shifts, and then their job is to make sure shit gets done. Mm-hmm. And that is when they implement the OKRs and the budgets and the project trackers, typically.
Yeah.
And it's when they start not writing code, but going to the review meetings, right? The retrospectives, the business review, the product review, the sales review. And really, those are, in effect, all ways of saying, my job is now to make sure shit gets done. They've been told by some coach or their team that they need to delegate. They learned that lesson, right? Maybe it took a little while, but they learned that they have to delegate. Of course, they still do some things themselves, but the core of their job is to make sure shit gets done, both by creating some systems and by doing that monitoring function. And the fact is that's kind of a giant project management job role. And most CEOs who are relatively organized do that transition quite easily. There are a few who are like super visionary and very chaotic, and they really need a COO or somebody like that quite early on. But most can manage at that stage 30 to 100 people. And so the transition from stage 1, get shit done, to stage 2, make sure it gets done, is generally quite smooth. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens when you grow to, pick a number, 200 people, and you have true C-suite professionals? You don't have a head of marketing. You have a chief marketing officer who has a head of digital and a head of PR and a head of product marketing and a da-da-da-da, right? You've got a big organization, but you've also got all those frictions, right? All those issues of bottlenecks and decision-making processes not getting done. If you are still in the mode of making sure shit gets done, you try to do what you used to do, which is you go to the product manager, you say, I need it shipped next week. We're 2 months late. And you think that that's going to work, and it doesn't work at all, because you're like trying to pull the lever that used to be the product manager with 3 people that he had to talk to. Now the product manager is talking to 25 people with open threads of communication. And when you go and yell at the product manager and says, we need to ship next week, nothing happens. The organization does not respond. And so making sure shit gets done simply runs out of gas. It doesn't work. And so the transition that you need to make psychologically and in skill terms is to what I call a stage 3 CEO, who is focused on building the organization that gets shit done, enabling the organization to get shit done. That is about selecting people who can work in that more complex environment. It is about helping to train the top team as to what their role is in the new organization. It is about cultivating those relationships at the top team, which were easy when it was 10, but now each has their own empire and it's not so easy. And it's essentially about setting a culture in which collaboration is more important than getting shit done. And often the people, as you say, who are like super hard charging, get shit done guys are not very good at the collaboration process. And so you have to really adapt the culture, evolve the culture, as you said, and only the CEO can evolve the culture. Only the CEO can change the rules of the game. And so if the CEO isn't doing that, no one else is. If the CEO steps up and says, my job is to build the organization that gets stuff done, that means everybody else has to step up too. That creates a complete transformation in the way leadership thinks about their job and in the culture of the organization. But that is a much harder transition for many CEOs to make. because it's a much less tangible role, right? I don't get to do stuff or go to business review meetings or yell at people because they're late. None of that happens, right?
And then I've seen a lot of CEOs starting to feel that, and executives as well. And you are right, is when the CEO is not able to go first, to jump first, to go to the other side, then those maybe 50% of the executives that are still growing with the company, maybe the CEO was able to hire new ones who already have this kind of culture, this kind of mindset, because they are already at that stage of growth of the company. They bring that kind of mindset. And what will happen is for the ones who are coming, they will get super frustrated with the ways the other guys work. And the other guys would
and
say,
vice versa.
These guys are really corporate guys.
They're bureaucrats. They don't do anything.
Yeah, bureaucrats.
Exactly.
They don't do anything. And the CEO is kind of crazy. So I want to make things happen. And these guys are not growing, are not able to think ahead, to plan for the future. These guys are really, really good at planning, but they are so slow at doing stuff. So yeah, I'm getting crazy. I feel a slave. I don't know what is not working. And then they are a bit lost, right? And of course they can't recognize as well that they are getting pissed off and feeling slaves of their own organization.
That's exactly it. The halfway point is often the hardest. When the two sides are looking at each other with zero mutual understanding of what the value is that the other side brings, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps the CEO is not capable enough of blending and coaching
Exactly.
and managing that transition. It's also, by the way, partly based on where you are. If you are based in Silicon Valley or maybe Austin or Boston, that next layer of senior people you bring in probably can do both. They've been through other scale-ups. They still know how to move fast. They know how to talk to the get shit done, hard charging guys in a way that doesn't feel.
They're builders and scalers. Yeah.
They're builders and scalers. Exactly. But if you're in Portugal or in Singapore and you're in kind of the first generation and all the senior executives you might bring in come from enterprise because there are no mature, large kind of entrepreneur-led organization.
Yeah.
Then the culture clash is much worse. And so I think the US hasn't thought about it as much as we have in Europe and Asia because they haven't had to, because they've had, 3 or 4 generations of companies and people have learned how to be executives and fast moving at the same time.
But I think that mistake keeps happening again and again and again. And I think there is also a share for what we have been saying here today. I think that's a great content for the ones that are now, hiring or replacing some seats of their current executive teams to go to the next stage to think about. So the mistake comes not only from the executive that joins that might not have the builder and scaler experience, but sometimes it's also the CEO is not creating the environment to make that executive successful.
Well, that's right. And partly they just don't, they know they need something, but they're not sure what it is, right? They can't articulate the role well enough. I'm very sympathetic to this.
Love it.
If you have had a head of product working for you and he or she left or you outgrew them, you know what a head of product does. And now you need somebody a little more senior who can manage a bigger team. That's fine.
Yeah.
But if you've never had a chief financial officer and you actually have no idea really what they do, but all your board member, everybody says, hey, you're $100 million company. You need a true CFO, go hire one. You're like, yeah, I don't know what good looks like because I don't really know what they do, right? So it's very tough. So there's a bunch of problems which make it difficult. There is another one, which I have thought a lot about, which is quite common, which is, hey, you're my finance director or my product guy. You've got me here. You know the organization backwards. You've given blood to get me here. I'm not going to abandon you now. I can see that you're having trouble leveling up, but I feel disloyal to you. if I hire somebody above you. I worry that you will quit if I hire somebody above you. I worry that if you quit, you'll take your 3 best product managers with you, and that'll set the organization way back. So I keep postponing and postponing and postponing and postponing. And then the organization keeps getting more and more problematic because you don't know how to run in that larger company. So that problem of, let's call it the loyalty versus what are the needs of the organization. And then if I do, and I have some thoughts about how you deal with that, but if you do hire the outside person, yes, the whole process of knowing how to integrate them, how to coach that person to connect with the get shit done people, and how to coach the get shit done people to know how to get the best out of the more enterprise person and to meld those two together. That's a skill. And a lot of CEOs may not have that skill. A lot of entrepreneurs, I should say, may not have that skill. But a stage 3 CEO, a true stage 3 CEO, does have that and many other skills. So I call those skills organizational intelligence, right? It's not EQ. It's not just, I know how to get along with this guy and I can read his body language. It's like organizational intelligence. I can see that if I bring in that guy over here, that's going to create this dynamic and people are going to react against it. I can anticipate that. So I can go to that team and say, don't throw that guy out just because he smells like old school, like he's quality. Here's how we're going to get this right. And you need that feeling, which I think of as OQ. And again, that is a very different set of skills.
Love it. That's really a great point, and something that I see when those VPs or C-suite leaders come in is the CEO not taking care of the egos of the ones who have been with him or her since the beginning. So he needs to treat the newcomers and the ones who have been there in the same way. It's kind of just saying, I prefer this child that just joined the organization instead of my other sons and daughters. And the other starts feeling resented. And again, it's kind of the same we see in sports, right? So if you have that star coming to the club and then you start treating that star as a special one, and you don't care to the rest of the team, things will not work well at the end.
Right. But I see more often the reverse. The reverse is that you and I founded the company with a third person. We're the inner circle. Actually, you don't have a very big executive role, external. And you're okay with that, but we're the inner circle. We still make all the decisions, and we do it in my house on the weekend, right? Now I bring in the big exec. He thinks he's going to have a seat at the table, and what he finds is, he gets treated nicely, but actually he doesn't have a seat at the table. He can't penetrate the inner circle of the old club that's been there from the beginning, and we trust each other. And so they often find that like they're in the formal process, but they're not in the real process. You can make the mistake both ways. You can give way too much importance to the new guy or woman, or not nearly enough.
Yeah. So let's get back to the stage 3 CEO, the one who builds the organization that gets shit done. And part of that, it's all about creating the culture and the high-performing team and the collaboration mindsets that gets shit done. So how do we know if we have a high-performing team in place? Because we all talk about it, inclusive myself. We all read Patrick Lencioni and the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Even the 5 temptations of a CEO, by the way, that's the one I also really recommend from Patrick. But how do we know? How can we measure it? How can we know, even for a coach like myself, that's okay, the clients you have the team like this, and now you have the 3.0 team after my intervention. So how can we measure that? How can we know?
Thank you for asking what is possibly the most important question of the day, because we have figured out a lot of stuff. Patrick Lencioni has figured out what is a good team versus a bad team, at least in a normative model way, right? And we do know good collaboration when we see it. But let me ask you kind of a similar question. imagine that, I'm head of marketing and you're head of sales, and we have a weekly meeting to look at sales. And we have no measurement. We have no sales force. We don't know what our sales were. How are we going to measure sales? We're flying completely blind.
Yeah.
It's unthinkable. We take for granted that we need those systems, back to that, in order to have the information that will spark the dialogue, that will allow us to fix the sales problem, that will get us back on track. And now maybe I'm the CHRO or the COO and you're the CEO, and we meet to talk about the organization or the team, but we have no measures. We're flying blind. What do you feel? What do I feel? Like, I feel like sales is good, but I don't know.
Yeah, he or she is doing a good work. I think
exactly.
It's fantastic, amazing.
Trying hard. So we need measures for sure. And your engagement survey is not the measure we need, right? It's interesting, but it certainly doesn't tell you the whole story. Here's what a good engagement survey tells you. Tells you how people feel, right? Do they like it? Are they happy? Do they expect to be there in 6 months? Would they recommend it to a friend? All that stuff. Essentially, it says, do I like working here? And that is one dimension of the equation that we need to measure. But the other equation is, are we getting shit done? Now, you can't actually tell that from your sales report, because your sales report measures 100 factors, pricing and customers and market and all competition, right? Mm-hmm. You can sort of tell it from your OKRs, but really you need a more granular way of saying, when you and I work together, are we getting good stuff done, or are we just fighting all the time? We could still hit our OKRs because the product is good and it's doing well and pricing is right, so great. But the management would not know that every time you and I meet, we waste all our time fighting. We can't agree on anything. And the OKRs would not tell you that. Mm-hmm. And so we need a way of measuring productivity, human productivity. And that's not how many lines of code we wrote. At a management level, that is, when you and I work together or in a team or a cross team, do we work on the most important issues? Do we know what the key things are to work on? Do we make good progress when we work together? Mm-hmm. Do we make decisions effectively and efficiently and not get bogged down by bickering or indecisiveness or lengthy consultation processes because we're trying to keep everybody happy? Like, the fact is that when you go into a meeting of 2, of 4, of 10, and you spend an hour and a half on the product roadmap, if you come out and I ask you, was that meeting productive? I guarantee you everybody can tell you. It's not like they don't know the answer. They know the answer. Like, they're like, oh man, it was super productive. We crushed it. We came up with all these good ideas. We reprioritized. I'm totally into it. It was fantastic. More likely they would say, we didn't really get much done. It was kind of a swirl. We kept talking past each other. Like, we had a lot of interesting conversation, but I'm not sure we're any clearer. We didn't make the decisions we need to make. We agreed we had to reconvene next week to talk about it some more. So how productive was it? Not very productive. Mm-hmm. And how do we get access to that? And currently we have no way. So, I mean, I have developed a measurement tool, which is still a prototype, which attempts to measure both of these dimensions at the same time. So it says, are we being productive in all of our interactions with my subordinates, with my teams, with my cross-functional, and am I enjoying the experience? And if you can get an integrated view at a fairly granular level, then that gives you a steering mechanism that allows you to make it better. So absolutely, we need a measurement system. Mine is very much a prototype, but I don't know of any others that are even at the prototype stage that truly measure productivity at that organizational level of the product roadmap meeting, the sales meeting, the team meeting, the quarterly strategy offsite. All of those things are massive drivers of productivity. And so here's my thought experiment. If you take an organization, one you're part of or that you know well, and you imagine that we could give everybody a magic pill like in the Matrix, and it made every meeting, every interaction on Zoom, in person, 2 people, 10 people, really productive, working on the right issues, working together effectively, generating ideas, building on each other's ideas, making decisions, clarifying action items in a time-efficient way. Not magic, not amazing, but just solid. And we made all of those meetings such that you walked out and said, yeah, I like working with these people. It felt good. It was respectful. I feel like my voice is heard. Each time I work with them, it gets a little better. No issues. This is a good team or cross-functional team to work with. If we could magically program every single meeting in your company from one-on-ones to 10-on-10s and offsites to be both productive and positive, by definition, that is a high-performing organization. By definition. What else could it be other than a high-performing organization? Because it gets shit done, gets the most important stuff done, and it builds trust and human sustainability as it goes. So obviously, if you go into a management offsite for a weekend and you really get a lot of good stuff done, but one person walks out feeling so bruised that they want to quit, that's productive, but it's not positive, right?
No,
it's like positive. It's not a sustainable piece. So you need both.
And that's a good point. Sometimes I feel that when we get to those stages where people feel that they are not part of that team and they decide to go in their way, it's also a great sign that we are moving forward as a team. Of course, assuming that we are not pulling that person and treating that person in the wrong way, assuming that everyone is respectful and that we are not a crappy team, that we are all people with values. It also shows that when someone resigns and quits, it's also a good sign, in my opinion, that we are doing things right.
Yeah.
So, last question before we go to the quick question and answer. Time is flying, so which means that we are having fun. So in terms of building that team, it was clear, especially in the Silicon Valley world. So in order to create that A team or world-class team, you need to make sure that you know very well the seats that you need for that stage of growth and to hire A players for those seats. And I'm kind of getting to the sense that this is completely wrong. And I think that we get more of this as we evolve. And I believe much more today in a blend of a mixture of people that are growing from inside that we are able to bring to the next stage, as we do with the CEO, and people that are coming from outside with that builder and scaler experience, and that blend helps the company to be much more successful. So what is your point about that old quote of or old idea of Silicon Valley of hiring A players to build high-performing teams?
I think if you're Amazon and you have all the money in the world and you have access to the world's greatest talent pool, you will find A players who really fit well in your culture. You'll pay them whatever they need. And is that better than what we could do here in Singapore? Yeah, it is. But to try and replicate it when you actually don't have access to that world-class talent, and you can't afford it, and you end up with a bunch of prima donnas who think there's something special running around getting paid too much and not really, it's not a successful strategy in my experience. I would argue that if you have a group of executives, it's like the sports team, right? The Golden Gate Warriors or the famous German football teams who didn't have superstars but won a lot of matches. If you have a bunch of players who are 7 out of 10, whatever that means, a bunch of execs who are 7 out of 10. They're good. They're not amazing. To get them to 9 out of 10, you're either going to have to spend a fortune right? Kick them out, deal with all the disruption, or find some magical coach who's 10 times better than I am, because generally my experience is that coaching does not take players who are okay and turn them into superstars. And my experience is that that whole process will not result in very much improvement. But here's the thing. You can take a team of seven out of 10 players, and if they're not playing well together, then as a team, they're 2 out of 10, and they're winning no matches. But if you get them playing really, really well together, and we know this from sports, the Golden Gate Warriors or whoever it is, they will win matches over and over and over again, even against the best teams with the superstars. And it's not expensive, and it's much more sustainable, but it requires brilliant coaching. That's where the coach is super special. Anybody can hire Messi if he has the budget and let him go, but to get incredible performance out of 7 out of 10 players is all down to the coach. And that is the essential ingredient. And so I would argue that if you're in Portugal, if you're in Singapore, it's almost meaningless to talk about hiring A players. I mean, of course, get the best people you can get. But really, the running room, the difference that you can make as a CEO is not to trade out your players for something better. It's to get that 7 out of 10 working cohesively as a team. And that's not just the top team, that is throughout the organization. Earlier, it's the top team. Later, it's the top 100, the top 200. And that's where the scaling gets really hard and where the mindset of the CEO really needs to shift.
I would just add, and we need to jump to the question and answer segments, but just add that as we record this episode in February 22nd, Porto in the Champions League just won to Arsenal for 1-0 in the last minutes. So it shows that the team with much less budget, and this has happened over and over again with consistency. So which proves that exactly the point that you said, and an affirmation of a coach that has not been very successful recently in terms of results. Of course, we can always challenge that, even with the new cup that was created. That Mourinho is the only coach who has won the Champions League, the UEFA League, and the new cup that I don't remember the name. He said that he doesn't coach a player like Ronaldo or Messi. There is nothing to tell them, to teach them. It's just making sure that the team plays in a way that supports them to be able to show their most important strengths. So I think that it completely affirms or reaffirms or highlights what it just said from a team perspective and the individual perspective, how much we lack when we are talking about the improvement of the team. And every single CEO that comes to me is, I need your help to fix that guy and that guy. And it never comes to me to say, this guy is world-class, help me make him even more world-class. And no CEO comes to me to say, look, I have okay people and world-class people, but they are not working very well together. How can I make them work better together? So I think this is maybe the point that we need to highlight the most. I fully agree with you. Awesome. So let's quickly go through our quick questions and answers. So Rob, if you'd have the opportunity to have a coffee with yourself at the beginning of your first journey in the Netherlands, what advice would you offer to your younger self?
Oh man, I made so many mistakes. But the short advice is I would have told myself, because I started my entrepreneurial career late, 40. So my first advice is get out there and take risks earlier, 30. And my second advice is aim high, work incredibly hard, which I did, but don't focus on the results for a long time. Don't watch the scoreboard. Just keep at it. Because when you watch the scoreboard early on, you go up, you go down, you get motivated, you get demotivated, and it actually makes you weak in a way. And to be strong, you have to ignore the results, believe in what you're doing, and just work at your hardest for a long period, and eventually the results will come. But I didn't know that then.
Love it. What are you the most proud of on your journey so far?
I was going to say reinventing myself successfully across multiple careers, strategy, venture capital, entrepreneurship, not equally successful in all, but actually that's not it. The thing I'm most proud of is that I was a decent human being in many different situations. And if you ask any of the people I worked with in those situations, even high stress situations, they say, Rob has integrity, honor, decency, humanity, on top of being a sort of moderately smart guy.
It's the most important, definitely. Worst advice ever received?
But, if you go and you ask people advice, very often what they tell you is essentially what worked for them.
Yeah.
Right? I was just a relationship guy, or I was just like a numbers guy, or I just did this, or I joined the biggest company or the smallest company. And it's like they can't get out of their own head. So the worst advice is never take advice from somebody who just tells you to do what they did, what worked for them, because it probably won't work for you.
Absolutely. And now the resources, your favorite book?
My favorite book is an oldie but a goodie. Your listeners will not know it. They should look it up. It's a book by a psychologist called Nathaniel Branden, Branden. The book is called The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, and it is the Bible, in my opinion, on what it means to be a psychologically healthy, strong, living with integrity, living with purpose person. It was written probably 40 years ago. 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. It's not skinny, but it's so well written. It's so rigorous, so clear, so crisp, but so confronting. You read it and you think, I am not the man I need to be.
I love it. That's a new one. Thank you for sharing. Favorite movie or series?
I kind of fell in love with a TV series called Sons of Anarchy. And on the surface, it looks like a bunch of Hell's Angels, drug dealers. It's all like violence and cops and robbers stuff. And actually, I love that stuff, kind of action, adventure, boy stuff. But it's almost Shakespearean in the depth of its tragedy and pathos, because it's really tracing the arc of a very dysfunctional family, and all the so it's one of those series that really works on 2 levels. One is very superficial, but a lot of fun, and the other is really, really deep and really, really beautifully written. So yeah, Sons of Anarchy, check it out.
Awesome. And finally, your favorite podcast, excluding this one.
I hear I'm maybe less original. I have 2. I do really like The Rest is Politics, which is, I think, one of the top 5 in Britain. They're just very articulate and smart people. And the other one is even less original. I actually really like the All In podcast. I mean,
yeah,
they can be irritating on politics. I don't like it. But when they talk about what's going on in tech, in the world of business and tech, they actually really know their stuff.
Absolutely. Rob, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show. We wish you all the best and a lot of success with an amazing book, Smooth Scaling. And we have seen some of the value today. And of course, you are more than welcome to come again to share more chapters of that book, and also to share how is being the reception of the book. And we hope that it's creating a lot of value to founders, CEOs, economies, society, etc. Thanks so much for making the time. A pleasure.
Thank you. And I hope to see you when I'm in Portugal this summer.
Absolutely. That would be a pleasure. And to our community, thanks for being there. We keep bringing you the best of the best to make your life easier as you scale up your company. See you soon and keep scaling.